Well, hello and welcome to Truth and Liberty. This is your host, Mike Lewis. This is, I believe, it's going to be episode 11. And today we have a bit of a special episode for you today. We are going to be talking about issue 2 in the state of Ohio. I am an Ohio resident, and we have a ballot initiative that is up for vote here in November. And it's been kind of controversial. And it's been one that has been there's been ads on both sides, and it's one of those ones where you watch the ads and you're like, who's really giving me the straight dope here? Both sides are telling you all about the reasons why you shouldn't trust the other side, but there's not been a lot of substance. Fortunately, there was a debate that was on last night. I'm recording this on Thursday. What is today? Thursday the 12th, and lose track of the days sometimes. Recording this on Thursday the 12th, and last night, Wednesday the 11th, the NBC affiliates got together from NBC affiliates from all across the state, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland mainly, got together to host a debate where they had representatives from the Vote Yes and the Vote No campaigns there to debate the merits of their particular view on the issue, which is good. And actually, I'm gonna put the link to the debate in the description for this video so that you can go check that out yourself. And I really encourage any Ohio voters to go listen to that for yourself. Don't just take my word for it. Don't just hear what I have to say about it. That's actually really good. And it was pretty good. And I have to say, from reading the ballot language myself, from listening to that debate, I personally am pretty solidly in the Vote No camp. And I hope to explain why. So, for starters, let me go ahead and just read the actual ballot language. This is evidently exactly how the issue is going to appear on the ballot in November. So, by the way, just to back up, if you are from the state of Ohio, this is for you. I have friends in my church and in my community who have been asking me, what's the deal with issue 2? What's going on with that? What does this mean? I don't know if they're necessarily asking my opinion on it, but they may be asking me to help them understand what it's talking about. So this episode is mainly for you. Those of you outside of the state of Ohio, maybe my regular listeners, maybe you're from other parts of the world, maybe you'll find this interesting as an analysis of real world application, because I come at these things from generally an anarcho-capitalist perspective, and I'm like, government shouldn't exist, or at least not in a state form, right? Back up a couple episodes, government, how we define government matters, right? A state government shouldn't exist, and so why bother with all these things? Well, I do believe that when we have these things going on, I think that it's still a good idea to be trying to be aware of what the state is doing, be aware of these things, that if there's any opportunities that we have to stand in and make a blow for liberty one way or another, and ultimately for justice, and I believe really those two things go hand in hand. It depends on how you define liberty, and I hope I've clearly defined liberty as not being libertine, disrespect and disregard for other people, and autonomous disregard for law. But I'm digressing on that point. So if you're outside the state, maybe you can see this is an application or a rubber meets the road sort of way of how I try to apply the way I think about these things to actual real world issues. And if you're from the state of Ohio, by all means, this episode is for you. I hope that this helps you at least understand maybe my perspective on the issue. Do your own thinking, do your own homework if you feel like you must, and by all means, think for yourself. I don't want you to just take my word for anything. So do watch this debate. It was a good one, but yeah, away we go. So here's the actual ballot language. Issue 2 would, quote, require the state of Ohio, including its state departments, agencies, and entities, to not pay more for prescription drugs than the price paid by the United States Department of Veteran Affairs, and establish that the individual petitioners responsible for proposing the law have a direct and personal stake in defending the law. require the state to pay petitioners reasonable attorney fees and other expenses, require the petitioners to pay $10,000 to the state of Ohio if the law is held by a court to be unenforceable, and limit petitioners' personal liability to that amount, and require that the Attorney General is to defend the law if challenged in court. So, just by reading that probably might still be confusing. There's a lot there. Some of it sounds a little lawyerish, so it might be a little hard to wade through. So let's just take this a little bit at a time. There's a couple different components to this. The crux of the issue seems to be that first. It's actually literally presented, at least in the forms that I've seen. It's presented in bullet points. So there's 2 bullet points, and the first bullet point is really the heart of the issue. And it's that top one: require the state of Ohio, including its departments, agencies, and entities, to not pay more for prescription drugs than the price paid by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. So that is the main idea, what this law is trying to do. So there's some things to think about there. The first thing to think about is that this is essentially a price-fixing scheme. Regardless of what you think about whether the VA is a good standard for pricing, whether the VA's prices are fair or not, basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, this is the price that we want drugs to be, and we're going to artificially pass a law that says this is the price that they're going to be. The problem with that is the government has absolutely no way of knowing what a fair price should be for drugs. How in the world could they possibly know that? They don't have enough information. They can't, they're pointing to the Veterans Affairs Administration, but who says that the VA's prices are prices that are really prices that we should follow? Why would they say that that's a better price or not? There's really no real way to know. Which really begs the question of what are prices? Prices are it's a signal. It's the signal of the value of an item. When people need something and they go and find it, the price signals how desperately they need that thing and how willingly they are to part with something of value in order to get that thing. The fact that they have to pay somebody to get it is merely a signal of the fact that they are receiving something of value, and so they are compensating the person rather than the only alternative for that would be to steal it. You could either trade something of value for value, or you steal. And so prices arise as a way for the person who is holding on to the thing to say, well, if you want this, I'll let it go, but I'm not willing to let it go for more than a certain amount. And the value of that thing is really, in any given situation, it's actually subjective. Any specific unit has a subjective value. There's going to be a subjective valuation by the person who currently holds it and the person who currently wants it, in a micro sense. So any individual transaction, everybody has a different set of values. Everybody has different priorities. Somebody might own a dog and not really care for it, but somebody else might own a very similar dog and attach sentimental value to it. Somebody might want a dog really bad. I've used the example in maybe blog posts before about price scalping. So you go to any sort of ball game and you see these guys selling tickets out on the street, and in theory, at least, scalping is supposed to be illegal. Well, why is scalping illegal? Well, because they're charging people more than the price on the ticket, and so somebody says, well, that price on the ticket is the value of the ticket. Well, what if it's number of years from now, and I'm trying to go down to a Cincinnati Reds game, and my son is starting as a pitcher for the first time ever. And of course, obviously, in this hypothetical, it's kind of ridiculous of a hypothetical because you'd think that he or the team would somehow provide me tickets in that situation, right? But suppose, for the sake of argument, that they didn't, right? It's going to be worth an awful lot for me to be in that ballpark. This is my son. He's starting his first baseball game as a major league player. I am going to be in that ballpark, and if the game is sold out, I don't care what the price on the ticket says. If I'm finding a guy who's got a ticket and he wants 10 times what it says on the ticket, I'm going to pay it, man. I got to get in that ballpark. My son is starting, right? So you can see, it's just an example, example of the kind of way in which subjective values really change in any individual situation, change whatever a price might be. And in the macro sense, talking about aggregate, we're talking about large scale economics here. A price for something, like the average price that people pay throughout an economy, throughout a society for a good or a product or a service, is determined by the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply. Well, what do those terms mean? Demand is simply a measure of how badly people need that thing. And supply is simply a measure of how many of that thing there are, or how many are being produced, or how many are readily available. How scarce is that resource? So if, we have one egg and 1,000 people want that one egg, then that egg is going to be pretty valuable to somebody, right? And so the price of that egg is going to be high. And if we have 1,000 eggs and nobody wants eggs, those eggs aren't going to be very valuable. So prices are a natural thing. Prices are a spontaneous order, if you will. Really, they are. They're a spontaneous order that happens when people exchanging stuff. It can be the raw materials that somebody exchanges with a metal or a coal miner or a metal miner or somebody like that. They dig stuff out of the ground, and a factory will buy that from them in order to make stuff, and then they'll sell that to somebody else. All these little exchanges, they sort of add up and accumulate, and just naturally and spontaneously throughout society will order this allocation of resources throughout society so that they are distributed as optimally as possible. And when there is more demand for something than the supply can really give, the price is going to go up. When there is less demand for something and there's more in abundance, that price is going to drop. And so this whole idea of fixing a price and saying, well, we know somehow in our minds, we've just come up with some arbitrary number that we think this is a fair price. That to me says there's an issue. There's a problem here. This is ultimately some form of government socialism. Now, that actually brings us to the next point about this, which is this is actually all about government socialism. This is about what the state departments, agencies, and entities will pay for drugs. In other words, I think that was mentioned in the debate last night. OSU Medical Center, other state-run medical facilities, Medicaid, Ohio Medicaid, and any other social program that involves helping people out with prescription drugs. One form of socialism or another, basically, where taxpayers are being required to pay the medical costs of people who can't afford it. Or to help people who are having trouble afford it. So this is socialism to begin with, right? And so there's just all kinds of problems with this whole thing even existing in the first place. But the reason I bring this up, the reason why it really has to do with state departments, agencies, Medicaid, those kinds of things, the main point with that is to say the Yes campaign is engaged in this tactic of trying to convince you that this is actually going to lower prices for everybody in Ohio. The problem is that's not sound economics. First of all, it's just a bait and switch. It's on its face, it's false. The law does not do anything directly about that. It doesn't do anything directly to actually cause that effect. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't say, you know what, the state of Ohio is going to pass a law that says everybody in Ohio, private companies, whatever, nobody in Ohio is to be charged more than X. No, that's not what it's saying. It's just saying that the state agency is not going to pay more than X, which, by the way, it's been pointed out, that theoretically could mean that the drug companies or whatever, whoever is going to have to make up the cost some other way. Maybe Medicaid won't pay that, so maybe now people are going to have to pay higher copays, or maybe the pharmacy is going to get stuck with stuff. Maybe they're not going to be able to afford to actually carry that drug anymore because the drug is still going to be more expensive, and just Medicaid's not going to compensate them for that. So for selling to somebody on Medicaid, the pharmacy would actually take a loss. So the state probably would have to come by with some sort of regulation, some sort of mandate that every pharmacy carry all of this stuff, even if it's not worth their costs for it, every pharmacy has to serve Medicaid patients, even though normally maybe they would say, oh, I'm not going to serve a Medicaid patient because that would cause me to lose money on this deal, but the state would then come in. So there's all kinds of problems with this, right? All kinds of problems with the state trying to fix a price or trying to arrange and organize and distribute resources in the economy. Socialism is doomed to failure, and of course it is funded through theft. So I can't support the program in and of itself. And even though, like, on its face, it might seem that a change in the program that would mean that taxpayers pay less. Or that less money is going to that program, the spending less. That seems like a very Republican position. And the guy from the Yes campaign, what was his name? Matt. I wrote it down here. Matt Borges. Sorry about that. Matt Borges from the Yes campaign. He's a Republican guy. I mean, he's worked with Republican campaigns, and you just watch the video in his introduction. It's all full of Republican credentials, right? So that seems like a very Republican thing, right? We're gonna slash spending on this government program. That sounds like a great thing, right? Except that it's being sold, like I said, it's being sold as this thing that's going to lower costs for everybody. But that's not actually the reality. So the two points that they make, in order to try to establish that case, is they say, first of all, that there's basically going to be this trickle down effect, that as soon as the state passes this regulation that Medicaid patients are going to not have to pay more than a certain amount for drugs, that's going to eventually trickle down. In fact, it's kind of funny because Borges actually keeps making the point in the debate last night. He kept pointing to a memo or a trade journal or something like that put out by pharmaceutical companies, where the pharmaceutical companies were saying, and this is his quote, he says, it would create an immediate demand for the same pricing to be made available to other states, the federal government, and private entities as well. And then he says later, it would cause an immediate demand in the marketplace for prices to come down. So the problem with this, I feel like I'm not recording any sort of screencast or anything like that, but this is where we would have to insert that clip from The Force Awakens, where Han Solo and Finn are planning their assault on Starkiller Base, and Finn says something about the Force, and Han Solo goes, "That's not how the Force works. That's not how demand works. This is not how economics, this is not how supply and demand works. Prices don't come down because people demand lower prices. That's not how it works." We're not really speaking in economic language here. We're using terms borrowed from economics, but we're not using them according to their real economic definitions here. We're just throwing these words around to make it sound like we're saying economic things, but we're really not. He is right, probably to a certain extent, that maybe if Ohio were to pass this such that the government in Ohio who has a certain amount of power and clout in order to be able to get their way on this, once they pass this to where the state of Ohio is able to dictate to pharmaceutical companies what the state of Ohio is going to pay for their drugs, then maybe other government jurisdictions, maybe other states, maybe the federal government, maybe who knows, maybe they'll start doing the same thing. And so perhaps maybe other government socialist programs will follow suit. But this idea that they keep trying to promote, the key problem idea here, is they keep insisting that this is going to trickle over to the free market somehow. It's going to trickle over somehow into the private insurance companies and what they pay. But there's no economic reason to assume that that's going to happen. None whatsoever. He says it'll create a demand that prices come down, but people can want lower prices all they want. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. Only a government that has the ability to say, well, we're going to mandate that this is the way it's going to be, and if you don't follow, we're going to punish you. Only they have the kind of power to create that artificial price fixing, right? Private companies don't. Maybe really large insurance companies can get volume discounts, but they're not going to be able to get the sort of discounts that we're talking about tonight. I mean, we're talking about 24% discounts. So it's not really going to happen. The funny thing about that discount, by the way, he's talking about the VA, the whole idea of the law. It says they're going to pin the price, or they're going to set the maximum price as being what the VA pays. Now, there was a lot of back and forth about whether we can actually do that or not, because theoretically, apparently the VA price is not public knowledge, so nobody really knows what they pay. So who knows if we can actually do that? Plus, there's there was a whole bunch of back and forth where the No campaign was talking about all of these other discounts that Medicaid and state agencies already get in the state of Ohio. That the number they threw out was actually like 23.5% or 23% basically. So they're already paying pretty much equivalent to what the VA pays. So this law would really not really do much of anything at all anyway. Which I don't really know. I mean, that's where you start getting into the whole, well, who's telling the truth here on this, right? And there's a lot of back and forth about Weinstein and whether he's a reliable guy and what his motivation is and what the motives of the drug companies that are opposing this is and all that stuff. And that's the stuff I really don't care to get into on this. And that's the kind of fluff stuff that really, honestly, it took up like 75% of the debate. The stuff of substance I want to talk about really is this, this idea of what actually happens, whether this law actually makes sense as a law to have. But the funny thing about that VA number is, apparently, according to Borges, he says 25 years ago, drug companies got caught red-handed overcharging veterans through the VA program. Well, okay, overcharging. How does he know they were overcharging them? Again, that's just some arbitrary valuation, right? Somebody says that they were being overcharged. Well, why were they being overcharged? Can we show a way that they were actually? I mean, did they somehow negotiate a price and then were charged more later? That would be an overcharge, right? It's not just an overcharge because they got charged more than they really wanted to pay. If the drugs were valuable enough to them that they actually bought them at the prices that were being demanded, that they didn't get ripped off or overcharged. Nobody gets ripped off if they voluntarily pay a price that's being asked for something. Yeah, they could wish the price was lower. I wish the price of gas was 25 cents a gallon. But I was actually very pleased to see that it was under $2 here again, which is nice. But when it's up around $2.50, $2.75, I could wish that it was lower all I want, but I'm not getting overcharged to pay the market price for gas. So he goes on to say, he says they were caught being overcharged to the VA program. Congress acted. They imposed a federally mandated 24% discount on all drugs sold to the VA. So right there, we've got contradictory language. Right in what he's saying here, right? If it's a discount, if the solution to the problem is that Congress imposes a discount on what? The market rate? I think at one point they actually used the term full price in the debate last night. I can't remember which side used it. It was very brief, but I did hear it. I did hear the term once. So basically, the VA was paying full price for drugs, and that's somehow an overcharge. Why is that an overcharge? By what standard is that an overcharge? Because they're veterans, or because it's a government? It doesn't make any sense, right? If the solution is a discount, then the problem wasn't an overcharge, right? By definition, that doesn't make sense. If the problem was an overcharge, the solution would be to ban the surcharge, right? An overcharge is where you're paying a surcharge on top of the fair price, right? So the solution for that would be to ban the surcharge. but the solution wasn't to ban the surcharge. The solution was to mandate a discount, right? The other interesting thing about that, though, was that later on in the debate, Barbara Edwards, who was from the No campaign, apparently made the claim that the VA discount happened as a result of the fact, or this supposed overcharge happened because when Medicare, at the federal level, federal Medicare enacted a similar 24% discount, then the prices on the VA went up. Or I don't know if they actually went up. Maybe she says they went up. Maybe they didn't go up, and maybe just the VA people were starting to look at the people on Medicare and were like, why are they paying less than us? We want to pay that same. We want drugs for that cheap too. Or maybe a little bit of supply and demand happened, as we're about to talk about, and the drug companies had to raise their prices on everybody else. So I don't know. But they keep making this claim that that's going to trickle down to the free market, and they also make this claim that. The Yes campaign makes this claim that there's going to be $400 million in savings to the taxpayer, right? They'll even use the term tax cut at times. And so, on this and on the it's going to lower drug costs for every single Ohioan, Ohioan. Every single Ohioan will lower their drug costs, and it's going to give tax cuts of $400 million. When they use that language, and they're very careful to just throw it in there every once in a while, so that the bulk of their language isn't actually saying exactly that, but they'll use those terms, though. They will. Like, if you listen to the opening statement by Borges, he kind of skirts around it, he skirts around, and in the very last line, it will lower costs for every single American. Or Ohioan. Not American, Ohioan. So definitely they want you to think. They want you to think that that even if you're on private insurance, your prescription drug prices are going to go down, and that you're going to get your cut of $400 million of tax cuts because now the state is paying less in taxes. So is that $400 million a legitimate number? Maybe. I mean, there's layers to this, right? So first question is that legitimately going to happen? Maybe it's not going to be exactly $400 million, but is there going to be some huge chunk of savings? That's one question. Question two is, what's going to happen to that money if it does get saved? And that's where the Yes campaign wants you to believe there will be a savings and that money's coming back to your pocket. Well, whether or not there's going to be savings, it ain't coming back to your pocket. They will find some other way to spend that. Maybe he even suggests they'll put it to schools, right? So he says at one point it's definitely going to be a tax cut, and they want you to think it's going to be a tax cut. They want you to hope it's going to be a tax cut. But he sort of admits in some of his reasoning and some of his answers to this question, well, it might not actually be a tax cut. We can't actually guarantee that, but maybe they'll put it to schools. Or, I don't know, who knows what else they'll find some other pork project to spend it on. Or maybe they'll end up spending it on paying the attorney fees of Weinstein and his gang. I don't know. I haven't even gotten to that point yet. But, well, let's think about this, though. The $400 million, is that really going to happen? Think about it. If the price of drugs is pinned lower than, what the state currently pays, and if the state does not increase consumption, then sure, yeah, they'll save money. But that begs the question, doesn't it? Is the state going to hold consumption constant? On a market, we would expect, again, on a market, prices are signals. They signal to people whether it's a good idea to produce or consume. If prices are low, it's going to send a signal to consumers that, hey, this is a good time to consume this thing. If they're high, it's going to signal to consumers this is not a great time to consume that thing. And when prices are high, probably the only people who are going to be consuming it are the people who really, really need it the most. If the prices are low, you're going to have the people who really need it. Maybe they'll consume more than they would consume otherwise. And then you'll have some other casual consumers who maybe that's not as important to them, but hey, they can afford it now, and so they'll consume it. The other thing that's going to happen is when prices are high in a market, that is going to signal producers to produce more. In a free open market, when demand is higher than supply, the price is high. And that sends a signal to producers, this economy, this society needs more X. Produce it, because you have an incentive. I mean, think about it, right? Let's think, you're a company, you manufacture widgets, and one particular widget that, I don't know, maybe you manufactured 10 of, right? And the price of it was $1 a widget, right? All of a sudden the price goes up to $100 a widget, right? Think about it. Are you going to produce one more widget? How much more money would you make from one more of that widget? You'd make an extra $100 just for that one widget. Why wouldn't you produce more of them, right? So of course, producers, anybody who has the ability to produce more of this, is going to bring more supply to market. And so they're going to then produce more of it and get more of it back. Get more money off of that, right? Well, that will eventually have the effect that supply is going to be diminished, supply is going to be increased, and then as a result, price will drop, and then we'll eventually reach this equilibrium. If price is low, that's going to send the opposite signal to producers. It's going to say it's not worth your time, or your efforts, or the allocation of your resources, whether it's the raw materials or your labor or whatever. It's not worth your time to produce any more of this. It's not going to return anything on your investment, and so it's not really a great idea to produce this. So don't. And so producers won't produce any more of it. And so, yeah, that's what normally happens on a market. So if indeed the consumption and the production of this product is left unmanaged by the government, and all they do is pin the price low, and let's assume for a second that we're talking about the whole economy, not just one segment, like not just that socialist program. Let's assume we're talking about the whole economy, and they artificially pin the price low, then what's going to happen is consumers are going to consume more, but since the price is pinned low, producers are not going to produce more. What's the result, class? A shortage. That's what happens. You're going to get a shortage. So just right there, we see the inherent flaw of trying to fix a price, trying to pin a price, right? Now, it's probably true, or it might be true. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know exactly how these state programs work. I don't know what sort of consumption controls they have. I have never been on Medicaid. I've never received this kind of government aid. I don't know what sort of restrictions there are, so I don't know. Maybe somebody who knows more about that can respond to this video and sort of clue me in on this. But, I mean, I don't know. They talked about EpiPens. The price of EpiPens, like, I don't know, they went up to like 10 times or something like that. So that was one example, right? So, I don't know. If you're somebody who needs an EpiPen, and you go and you try to get like 5 EpiPens, does the state tell you, no, you can only get one? And do they tell you that because they have decided that that's all that you need, or that's like a cap that they've placed on how many each person can get? Or is that simply because it's too expensive for them and they can't afford to give you any more? I don't know how that works, right? I really don't know how that works. Or do they just give you as many as you want? And so maybe if all this time, since it's a government program, and so they're just like, oh, we're just going to spend and spend and spend, maybe it won't actually have any change in consumption. Maybe they haven't really been paying attention to actually how much it costs. Maybe they're not, because they're not calculating profit and loss, and they're not thinking, oh, well, each one of these costs me $5. I got to be conservative with how I use them, and these people really don't need this many, so I'm only going to give them 2 even though they want 3. Maybe they're not thinking that way, and so they're just going to continue giving people however many they're asking for, or however many the doctors think that needs to go out, or whatever whatever the doctor prescribes, they're just giving them out. They're not having any sensible price controls or anything like that on them, so maybe there won't be any change in consumption that way. Who knows? Or maybe the government has been saying, you can only have X number because this is all that we're able to afford to give you. I don't know, or who knows. But think about this. Let's assume for a second that there will be a change in consumption. Might not be. I don't know. I would almost expect that they wouldn't be. I don't know. We don't really know, though. Right? But think about this. Assuming that there is a change in consumption, let's say somehow that the consumers have the control over how much they consume now, and they also somehow know that they can consume more because they cost less. I don't know how it works. But let's assume that with the price signal goes down, consumers start consuming more of this. What's going to happen? Well, they are going to take supply away from the open market. Right? They're going to basically siphon that supply off of the open market towards the lowered consumption over here, or sorry, the increased consumption over here on the Medicaid market or the government program market. All right, so you basically have two markets operating, or you have like a split market. You have one supply pool that is supplying two markets. You have the market for drugs within the government assistance programs, and you have the open market for drugs with private insurance and private individuals paying their drugs. You either have some sort of government assistance, or you're private negotiation. So you have two different markets, but they're supplied by the same supply pool. And so if consumption in one of those goes up, that takes supply away from the other market. And so now you have, if that happens, if consumption goes up in the public market, then the private individuals, private insurance, they have less supply to draw from. Their demand isn't going to change. They're not going to start consuming. I mean, they might end up having to start consuming less as a result of this, but just right now, just the fact that these people, they're not going to change anything. They're not going to start consuming less. Their demand isn't going to change at all, not directly. And so what's going to happen when their supply goes down? Their price is going to go up because there's less supply and there's less to go around. Each individual unit now in the private market is more valuable because more people want each one. And so this idea that somehow this lowered price in the public market is going to somehow trickle down to the private market, there's no reason to assume that would happen. At the best case scenario, nothing happens because the private insurance companies have no clout to really demand that kind of price. At the worst case scenario, though, prices go up in the private market. Now, Butland had made this point before, and one of the debaters asked him to defend that point, and unfortunately, he didn't do a very great job of explaining that. He said it was a basic economic concept, which is true. It's based on the most basic economic concept: supply and demand and scarcity. And what are prices, right? But he didn't explain all of that. Like all that I just explained to you, he didn't go through that. He just says, oh, well, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and somebody has to pay. Which almost made him seem like this greedy, I don't really care type of guy, right? And I really hate that perception, that it's sort of accidental. Most of what Butland, by the way, was for the No campaign. And most of what he said was really on point. In fact, I almost thought about doing this like Dr. White style, where I would actually play the debate and have it recorded and pause it and make comments and everything. But I got like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes into it, and Butland was saying a lot of the stuff that I wanted to say anyway. And I was like, well, I don't really need to comment. He made that point almost better than I could or whatever. So I encourage you to go listen to that debate. But on this one, I think he really fell short, because I think he got an opportunity to actually really explain, maybe not quite in detail, not quite in the detail I went into, but he had the opportunity to really explain to you how supply and demand works and why that will actually result, or could result in this. Because the claim at that particular point that they're asking him to defend was, the claim that the prices are going to go up. And the Yes campaign says, well, this is the drug companies trying to hold you hostage. And trying to say, well, if you don't vote no on this, we're gonna jack your prices up. Like, but that's not what is going on at all. So the rhetoric and the everything from the Yes campaign is totally and completely disingenuous, and it has no credibility from me whatsoever. They say things that are flat out false. They insinuate things that are flat out false. And the thing that they repeated the most last night, the thing that Borges repeated the most last night, was just to talk about the fact that the drug companies are behind the No campaign. So what? I mean, maybe that fact is enough of a reason to be suspicious of them. Maybe you would want to zero in and say, okay, why are the drug companies against this? Maybe because what he wants you to think, what Borges wants you to think, is that the drug companies are colluding to try to protect their racket. All right? And he even uses the term rigging. He says the system is rigged, right? And they want to keep it rigged, and they want you to not be able to undo the rigging in the system. The problem is that does not fit the language of this issue. That doesn't fit the language of the law. The language of the law has nothing to do with there is this rigging in the system that we're going to undo, where we're going to allow prices to now be controlled by the free market. Borges even used the term free market. It's ridiculous. His position has nothing to do with free market. It is anti-free market. Now, again, we're talking about free market in the context of a government social program is kind of dumb anyway. But anyway, the point is, if the law had said something more like, okay, this system is rigged, it artificially pins prices high, it gives such and such special privilege to drug companies, we're going to wipe all that out, and now we're going to allow it to just be free market, and everybody's going to be able to negotiate, that would be fine. Or maybe something at least to say, okay, this is good. But that's not what the law is. The law is a price fixing scheme. It's an artificial pinning of the price lower than the market rate. Well, why would a business be against that? Well, because it would cause them to lose money. And why is that a bad thing? Because apparently corporations are evil, right? Now, granted, big corporations oftentimes engage in evil things, and there are many ways in which they are shielded from the consequences of their bad business practices. And there are many ways in which they have the ability to gain political favors by lobbying Congress and going before government and getting certain regulations and everything in their favor. And that happens all the time, and it's something we should be suspicious of. But it doesn't mean that every time business is trying to do something, or every profit business makes, or every time that they try to lobby government, that it's automatically and inherently bad, right? We need to actually think through what is actually going on to consider whether or not this actually is good or is bad on its own merits. Maybe the drug companies being involved might be a reason to be suspicious, but we'd have to look further into it. So is the system rigged? Yes! The system is rigged. Absolutely. But it's not anything that this law is addressing that is rigging the system. What is rigging the system are mainly two things. You've got the FDA and copyright/patent law. Right? I mean, just look a couple years ago when Martin Shkreli, I think, is that his name? I probably butchered that pronunciation. But the guy, he made that pill, or he bought the patent for that AIDS pill. Or whatever. And he jacked the price way up. And everybody's like, oh, this is so evil, this fat cat, greedy capitalist. And it's like, well, maybe not, right? Ultimately, let's assume that he is actually, doing something nefarious here. That he is really just trying to rip people off, and he's really just trying to jack this price as high as he can so he can get as much money out of people as he can. Let's assume that's what he's actually doing. What's to do? What's there to be done about this? Is the government to artificially pin a price? Well, let's assume we're on a free market here. What would happen? What would happen would be somebody else would start producing that drug and sell it for much lower than what he's selling it for. And the price would come down and it would reach equilibrium. Because there'd be no way for him to sustain or get away with doing that. Why didn't that happen? Because patent law and FDA approvals and regulations and all that stuff prevent people from being able to compete on the drug market. Drug companies are shielded from competition, real competition and potential competition. And because of that, that is probably the single greatest cause for the increase in medicine prices in this country. It's because the FDA, as well-intentioned as they are, I mean, it's a lofty goal to want people to be safe from bad drugs. It's a lofty goal to want to make sure that drugs actually accomplish the purpose that they are set out to accomplish. And so let's assume that the FDA is trying to do a good thing. The problem is they add a whole bunch of red tape. They cost tons of money. They take extra time and then add on to the patent thing to it. It is really, really hard, nigh on impossible, for somebody to enter the marketplace for pharmaceutical drugs and be able to compete with an established player in the industry. And when is that needed the most? Is when a drug is really something like this AIDS drug that is like, it's helping people who really desperately need help, who are really struggling, and now the price of the drug is super high. What's to be done about that? What needs to happen is the market needs to be allowed to function. Somebody needs to be able to buy that drug, needs to be able to siphon the profit off, or needs to be able to buy that drug and reverse engineer it and produce their own version of it so that they can then. And it doesn't necessarily, in that particular case, it's not even necessarily about competition. It's about helping the current supplier be able to supply the demand and taking pressure off the supplier. It doesn't always have to be about trying to one-up each other or anything like that. It's about, actually, at that particular point, it's about helping AIDS patients who need this drug and aren't able to get it because there's low supply and high prices. So then we create more of it and bring it to the market, and now people can afford this thing because it's abundant and it's cheap. And if, for some reason, the raw materials for a particular good are so rare that we can't just magically produce more, maybe somebody has an incentive then to come up with a cheaper alternative, right? And this would happen all the time if the FDA and patent law didn't stand in the way. That's the system that's rigged. That's the way the system is rigged. This ballot issue 2, does absolutely nothing about that. It doesn't. All it does is it steps into the reality of the fact that rigging is already happening and tries to ad hoc from behind the scenes slap on a solution to the felt problem, the pain point at the end point of the consumer. But that doesn't do anything to fix the core issue. It doesn't do anything to solve whether or not drug prices are actually going to be more affordable. The best thing it's going to do is it's going to cause shortages. It's going to cause misallocation of resources. It's going to cause some sort of perverse incentives. It might even drive prices up in the open market. Who knows? There is no way that people are just going to be like, oh, we want that price too, give it to us, and just magically get it. The reality doesn't work that way. It's bad economics through and through. So I don't know. That to me seems to be about all I could say about it. It doesn't seem like a sound way of thinking. It doesn't seem like a sensible plan. Will it cut costs for people on Medicaid? Will it keep Medicaid price? Keep the Medicaid budget down? Maybe, maybe not. Will I see a dime of that back in my taxes? Probably not. I can almost guarantee that I won't. Will it have perverse incentives that have unintended negative consequences? You betcha. It always does. When the government gets involved in trying to fix things, at least 9 times out of 10, they usually make the problem worse, one way or another. And so this does not seem like a great idea. So I've spent about, 50 minutes just talking about the economics behind whether or not this first bullet point on this thing makes any sense. I haven't even talked about the second point. And honestly, I would say don't worry about that. Because just on the first point alone, I have enough to know I don't want to vote for this. I know I want to vote against it. That's all I need right there. I really, on the second one, it seems weird to me. They're going to establish the individual petitioners responsible for proposing the law. I think that is this Weinstein guy and his dudes and his company, his foundation or whatever. I don't know exactly what it means for them to have a direct and personal stake in defending the law. That is really muddy to me, even after listening to the debate last night. What exactly does that mean? It almost seems like it's just, I don't know. There's this cap of liability. There's this $10,000 that they would have to pay to the state if the law is found to be unenforceable, and that is like the maximum they would have to be able to pay. So it's like they have a direct and personal stake, so the state is going to shield them from the penalties of it falling through, I guess. So basically what it's saying is these guys stand to benefit from this passing. And if it doesn't pass, they're going to lose money. So what they're going to do is they're going to try to fight this. So the state is going to say, basically, you have to pay us $10,000 if it falls through. Not if it's defeated on the ballot, but if it passes on the ballot and then the courts say this isn't going to work. But in order to protect that from happening, because these guys are going to stand to lose out, not just, not just this $10,000, but some other stake they have. I don't know what that stake is. Are they going to lose revenue? Are they going to lose some other? I don't know. It's really weird. Nobody's explained to me what that is. But it's like there's some other thing they stand to lose beyond just the $10,000 here. It doesn't seem like it's revenue, though, because they're talking about cutting costs. And Borges at one point even said, this actually would hurt our or Weinstein's bottom line. It's really, really weird. Really weird. So in order to shield them from that, what they're saying is we want the state to pay our attorney fees, and we want the attorney general to take our side if this thing goes to court. And basically, they want the state to go all in to make sure that the law is defended if it's ever challenged in court, in order to protect Weinstein and his guys from the fallout, that loss that they stand to lose, to protect them from that negative eventuality, if the law was to be found to be unenforceable. That seems, well, they said it, Butland said it in the debate last night, that it's really unprecedented, and it really is. It's really weird that somebody would be all like, we're going to make this law in Ohio, and I have a personal stake in this, and so you, the state, have to protect me. It is so weird. We're not talking about private property here. I mean, everybody's private property should be protected by default. That should be what the law does. That's just all it is. Don't hurt people and take their stuff. So I am about as confused as you are about this. And so it's like icing on top of the cake of this price fixing scheme is bad economic juju. And now we've got this. We want to get the state on the hook to defend this law against all comers. It's just really weird. And by the way, the criterion here also is if the state courts should find it to be unenforceable. What about unconstitutional? Or what about unjust? Where's the language about that? This is unenforceable. Now, the unenforceable line comes from the fact that apparently, they've said we can't actually know what the VA pays because that number is not public, and so there's no way to actually enforce this law. Butland also made a point about, there are some drugs that Medicaid uses that VA doesn't use. So what do we pay for those? Nobody knows, right? Or, of course, if you take the 24% discount number, maybe we just say, take the same 24% discount. I don't know. Who knows? But it's a mess. This whole law is really backwards. It's really weird. And ultimately, the way that the Yes campaign is trying to promote it is disingenuous. It's full of truths, half-truths, that are said in such a way as to give false impressions. Then in the next statement, they'll actually say the lie. So they'll say one sentence that's full of this will save money for everybody, right? Because it's going to lower the prices for people on Medicaid, and it's going to cut it's going to cut the amount that taxpayers save, so it will save everybody money, right? Because it'll cut the amount that taxpayers pay, right? That'll save everybody money. And that statement, assuming that consumption stays the same when price drops, then that could be a true paragraph. But then in the next paragraph he says everybody's prices will go down. Well, that's what they want you to assume from the first paragraph, and then he actually doubles down and actually says that in the second paragraph. It's really weird. It's really disingenuous. It's full of half truths and almost outright lies. I don't trust them. And he could say all he wants about the drug companies being against this. It could just be that it's bad for business, right? It could just be that it is a regulation that would give power maybe to this Weinstein. I mean, Weinstein sells prescription drugs, so maybe it would just give too much power to him at the expense of all the other guys. So maybe it's because they're against the cronyism. Maybe the Yes campaign is the cronyism. So it's just weird. So all in all, I am against this. I'm probably going to vote no for it. You can come to your own conclusion by all means. Watch the video, watch the debate, and come to your conclusion. If you have any questions, if you feel like there's something about this that I haven't addressed, drop a comment and I will respond to it. If you have something to add, or if you feel like maybe there's something I missed, by all means. This is just my thoughts on it. This is very much a conversation. I want to hear your thoughts. I hope this helps you think through this. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm voting no. You can think for yourself. But I'm not gonna say that my hope for reality or hope for justice or hope for anything rests on it failing or passing, or anything like that. I really don't. I don't pay that much heed to political machinations or anything like that. I don't trust in chariots or horses. My trust is in the name of the Lord my God. But overall, I think that this law is wrong-headed. It is deceptive in the way it's being promoted by the Yes campaign, and so I don't really think that we should support it. I think we should oppose it because it probably, at best, will have some sort of adverse consequences. So, thank you very much for tuning in. This has been Truth and Liberty. I've enjoyed doing this. Your host, Mike Lewis. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Please let me know if you have any questions or topics you want me to cover. And also, if anybody has any suggestions for maybe good intro music or stuff like that. I mean, I'm just kind of real basic here on this. I don't know. I'm just slowly ramping up on this whole thing, but I don't know if I can. Obviously, I'm assuming I can't just go grab I can grab Tom Sawyer by Rush, and some of you will know what I'm talking about with that. If you do, then you get a cookie. I could just go grab Tom Sawyer by Rush and put it on there, but I'm probably going to get a cease and desist for that, right? So, because it's a copyright infringement or something. I don't know how all that works. I don't know what I would need to do to get something that's passes all the copyright. I don't have a legal department. I don't understand all of that. I know that IP is theft, but I don't know that I don't know how to skirt around the fact that copyright law exists, or not skirt around it, but comply with it. I don't want to skirt around it. I want to comply with it. I'm not just going to fly in the face of it. I am going to be ordered under the civil magistrate, and even though their IP laws are unjust, I'm not going to stick my neck out there and get my show shut down because I've been using licensed material and not paying. So I don't know how to go about all that. Maybe I'll figure that out later. But if anybody has any suggestions for how to do that, by all means, send me any comments or anything you have. But thank you very much for tuning in. My voice is starting to run out on me because I've been sick lately, so I'm gonna leave it there. But I hope everybody has a good day. Bye.